Hi, and welcome to the third lecture. And this lecture is dedicated to the topic to work in a student-centered manner. My name is Sadat Karimi, and we are going to have a focus on student perspective today. In this lecture, I focus on students' learning and the struggles of developing good study techniques. For the experienced teacher, it's obvious that teaching is about encounters between people and how people experience and understand the teaching content. The question is how college students view the teaching and perceive the content. What experiences and expectations do they have, and how do these influence the way they approach their studies? High school students or college students or university students, how they view the teaching and how they perceive the content. The Swedish scholar Göran Fransson argues that university teachers should strive to understand students' perspectives in teaching. The approach includes analysis of planning, implementation, and evaluation of teaching. Let's talk about each of them: planning, implementation, and evaluation of teaching, by focusing on student perspective. Good study techniques should implement all good teaching. But still, the shift in perspective from self to the other seems to offer a challenge for university teachers, at least if one relies on what students say and what research shows. To support students' learning, you have to start where they are. It's an adage that's easy to say, but hard to live by. Among other things, I touch on how the transition between high school, lots to say upper secondary school, and higher education can be experienced, and how teaching can take different forms in high school and in higher education. Among other things, different aspects on each subject's built-in logic are emphasized. Well, we said about that, we mentioned that it's struggle for new beginners. So as a student, they struggle with understanding the concepts and they ask questions about clarity, planning, and stress. They understand demands and expectations in different ways. In this lecture, I will present deep learning and surface learning interspersed with experiences and voices of university students. My focus is mainly on research on study techniques with new university students. The goal with the lecture is therefore to make university teachers aware of student strategies, how they experience studies, and how teachers can use strategies to support and develop student study techniques. Well, the fact that teachers and students perceive the same situation in different ways is thought-provoking. So this lecture is for all university teachers, regardless of disciplinary background, affiliation, or level of teaching experience. A student I recently met asked the following: what is expected of me as a student? How should I do to cope with my studies? And you can reflect that it's a reasonable question. Well, the questions are reasonable, and after a while, many students develop some form of understanding about recruitment levels, work efforts, and teaching methods. As a student, one must develop a competency in being a student, what we call a student competency. This consists of abilities, skills, and attitudes that students need to learn and develop successfully as students in higher education. Part of the competence, student competence, concerns what is usually referred to as study techniques. That's models for how to plan studies, how to note down support words, for example, memorize content or read text, so-called speed reading. These could be seen as technical aspects of student competence. The skills may be important in themselves, but the most important aspects of student competence are the students' way of thinking, understanding, and relating to their studies and relating in their studies. Such factors are more important for learning than the techniques used to, for example, to read quickly. um, I focus on the technical aspects of the student competence and emphasize student thinking and attitudes about the conditions of higher education. Students create perceptions about higher education, and expectations arise about their own studies based on the frames of reference they bring into the education. We all do it. We bring references from our previous experience. For example, in the form of our own experiences and other stories, our parents, maybe elder siblings or close friends about what it's like to study. It's reasonable to assume that good experiences and stories create positive expectations, while less positive stories create a wait and see attitude and moderate expectations. What education one chooses depends on one's interest in subjects or professional areas, as well as more or less rational conditions about, for example, what one wants, what he is capable of, and what can generate work. Beliefs and expectations are also created by organizational norms, cultural norms, or institutional norms and patterns of action around teaching, studying, and learning. As a student in higher education, you have many years behind you in elementary and secondary and upper secondary school, where you acted as a pupil and saw teachers teach. The students have created beliefs and patterns of action about how teaching could be conducted, can be conducted, or should be conducted, and learning should be conducted. So, in teacher education, for example, it's an important task to get student teachers to analyze, understand, and reinterpret their previous experiences. They must leave their pupil perspective on what teaching is and adopt a teacher perspective. As a student, they have only seen certain aspect of a teacher's work. The wide-ranging dilemmas and considerations that teachers face are often unknown to students, especially if one relates student experiences to course and curriculum plans, or to the diversity of expectations that exist among different actors within the higher education. One aspect of student competence is that the student understands what characterizes higher education and what the differences are compared to, for example, studying in a high school or secondary school or the school for adults. Um, we have in Sweden the school for adults. Anyone can complete their uh, primary education or education from upper secondary school if he did not succeed in time regarding due to the different problems, family or health or etc. In addition to being able to choose the focus of their studies in higher education, there is a pressing pace of study, demands for critical thinking and independence. There is a large amount of material to absorb, and advanced text genres such as scientific articles and reports. In addition to these differences, subject traditions look different, and upper secondary and university teachers teach in different ways, of course. All of this must be discovered, understood, and dealt with by students. It's a well-known fact that subject and educational traditions differ, but in what ways do educational environments and subject traditions differ? So it's essential to reflect on what are the possible consequences of the differences? What do the different environments mean for teaching and learning? What do the differences mean for student strategy choices? These are also very essential questions to pile up. Something from my own experiences. I have worked as a teacher in mathematics in higher education in 25 years. There are comparative studies of mathematics teaching in upper secondary school and in higher education. The studies show that teachers in higher education and upper secondary schools use different goals and different strategies. For example, Turenberg, Philipson, and Kong's study there, where they argue that introductory courses in higher education often prohibit calculators or formula collections. The idea why they prohibit. The idea is for students to develop conceptual understanding, first of all, formal knowledge and calculation skills by refraining from using calculators. The opposite, they argue, is true in upper secondary schools where aids are almost always permitted and where there is also a perception that formulas and calculations can be an obstacle to students' understanding. But in higher education, calculations and numeracy skills are seen as a prerequisite. They can all this already. That's why they are admitted to the university. So it's a prerequisite. It must be a prerequisite for understanding. So now they can spend their energy for thinking more complex material. So the methods of teaching can differ. Another scholar, Stadler, believes that teachers' briefings in upper secondary schools provide complete support for how students should solve exercises. Teachers often teach how to solve specific problems. They provide solution models and then the student practice. Teachers in higher education often have other purposes for reviews and lectures, for example, to illustrate an overarching mathematical idea or theory. In the same way in your subjects, for example, in your fields. The idea behind the approach is that students should understand principles that they later apply when solving problems. Students who ask for help in higher education often have the overall principle explained in line with this. According to Stadler, on the other hand, secondary school teachers often help with solving the task. My example concerns mathematics teaching, but different teaching rationalities occur in all subjects, as I said before. Extensive research shows how norms, values, assumptions, languages, actions, and rationalities within different subjects and disciplines affect how teachers understand and implement teaching. A study, for example, of Fransson and Hammarström, Swedish scholars, or Lindblom, Ilen, Etele, and others, or Bloscher. In these studies, they study differences and similarities in subject rationalities between history and economics. Bloscher, 2004. This study reveals, among other things, differences in views on scientific and critical thinking. Blosser believes that critical dialogical reasoning is close to the subject of history, meanwhile mathematical logical reasoning is close to economics. Differences between upper secondary school and university are also highlighted in research by ask for example, when it comes to writing standards. As a student in higher education, it's important to discover and understand the underlying rationalities that you can relate to them. Teachers must help students see, understand, and relate to the rationalities. So the teacher's role is crucial first of all, in this. This is one of the central parts of an argument about the importance of teachers in higher educational developing students' study skills. Do students understand the underlying rationalities in a certain subject or area of knowledge? Do they understand how to act and why? So these questions pose a challenge for every teacher to become aware of different nationalities and teaching cultures. Well, toward a student's perspective, what should be mentioned? First of all, the teacher's approach, of course. In the next step, the teacher should communicate with the students so that they understand the differences and adapt their studies according to the rationalities. What are the characteristics of my subject? How do we teach the subject? And why do we teach in this way? What underlying principles do we learn towards? Do students perceive these underlying principles? What do they think about them? Are the principles optimal for students' learning? Or might the principles need to be developed in some way? What makes students adopt a certain way of studying? Here are the questions you can reflect on, just to name some. Again, my example, and even caution, a student in an engineering program where I teach mathematics, a student gives the following self-image. I have always considered myself smart and have previously had an easy time with my studies, but the first courses at university were a bit of a shock. Well, as a teacher, you can be tempted to believe that if students are just intelligent enough, they will pass their studies. Reality is often more complicated than the quote expresses. Even an intelligent student needs to be motivated for their studies. Um, yeah, teachers who lack the ability to make the subject interesting or have difficulty placing the subject in a larger context can lose students' interest and motivation. Intelligent students also need stimulating challenges, perhaps to a greater extent than normal students. Intelligence hardly automatically leads to completing one's studies. Just reminding. A few years ago, I met a student in an economics program who was a member of Mensa, which is in Swedish meaning he had taken the society's intelligence test and was found to score in the top 2% of the population. Also, he found it easy to understand details and complex relationships in his studies. He felt that it could become confusing when he had to explain wholes to peers and teachers. For example, if the students read and discussed leadership theories, the result was often that instead of focusing on theory A, theory B, theory C, theory, etc., individually, he described all the theories at once. In a way, it was as if he was captured by all the details that it was possible to think about, structure, and comment on. A consequence of this way of thinking and associating could lead to the student appearing messy and incoherent in conversation and writing. His fellow students lost track of the thread in a tangle of thoughts and connections between different theories. One reason for the confusion was likely that the student omitted information that he found was superfluous or, somehow, but that his fellow students needed to understand the whole picture. It's a family phenomenon that someone who communicates verbally and in writing sometimes fails to provide enough information, good information at the right time and the right place for others to follow. It's an ever-present challenge in human communication to share the right information in the right amount and at the right place and time to enable others to understand. But in this case, it seems that it's difficult for the fellow students. Conversations about deep and surface learning helped him along the way. Conversations that offered and provide with myself as a student understood how he thought and the reasons why others had difficulty understanding him. Now the student is trying to develop strategies to structure and break down complexities into manageable parts. This will make it easier than before to communicate effectively. For this part, I would also mention that the student occasionally experienced frustration with having to change his way of thinking. But yeah, it's okay. It's belong to the uh, phenomenon. After that experience, I began to think about what the student perspective means. That's my view of students and my ability to adapt their perspective. The challenge for teachers in higher education is to develop a student perspective on teaching. It's really a challenge. One aspect may be whether teachers are aware of their teacher-centered or student-centered teaching, the awareness. Well, does the teacher focus on their own activities in teaching? Does he focus on the students' learning, or does the students get to be active? Uh, also, teachers may have stated ambitions to work in a student-centered manner. Studies of teaching, scientific, I mean, studies, investigations, um, studies of teaching and student statements show that teachers-centered teaching dominates, still dominates, partly due to institutional forces. Another aspect of a student perspective means that the teacher can somewhat understand the student situation, thoughts, and tribulations. It's about understanding how students think and why. When a student expresses that they are stuck, um, uh, a first question from the teacher should be, how do you think about it? Uh, yeah, this way you can capture the students' thoughts, understand where they are in their thinking, and develop a student perspective that you can then build on when trying to help the student understand. So let them express them, explain them, and yeah, hear them. The importance of adapting a student perspective in teaching is a key argument. The intention is to strengthen such ambitions among teachers to contribute to reflection and contemplation. But the intention is also to provide new pieces of the puzzle to this understanding of the students' challenges. It continues to be about conceptual understanding, clarity, stress, and planning. First of all, I emphasize concepts, understanding of concepts. So in my next lecture, I am going to to educate the topic to the understanding of concepts. Here you can see the references. I use it for this, mention it in my lecture. Franson, Gustafsson, Prose. So good luck with your reading. See you.